Hi, I'm Maximilian Alvarez. I'm the editor-in-chief of the Real News Network and host of the podcast Working People. And this is the art of class war on Breaking Points. Well, here we are. Another chapter in the saga of the crisis in the U.S. freight rail industry is being written in blood before our eyes this week. After 3 years of stalled negotiations between the country's freight rail carriers and the 12 unions representing over 100,000 railroad workers, after weathering a long, contentious, excruciating process of clearing all the stages outlined in the Railway Labor Act to reach the point where strikes or lockouts on the railroads could legally take place. After months of union members reviewing and voting on a tentative agreement that was reached just hours before strikes or lockouts were set to begin in September, and after 4 of the 12 unions voted that tentative agreement down, 4 unions that represent a majority of workers on the railroads, we have once again been staring down the barrel of a potential national rail shutdown that was expected to begin as early as December 9th. But as it turns out, and I'm sad to say, many workers and bosses in the rail industry expected this to happen the entire time. President Biden, the quote, most pro-union president you've ever seen, let the mask drop this week and urged Congress to override the democratic will of rail workers and their right to withhold their labor and force a contract down their throats to, quote, avert a rail strike, which Congress has the power to do under the Railway Labor Act. As Emily Cochran reported on Wednesday at the New York Times, quote, the House on Wednesday resoundingly approved legislation to avert a nationwide rail strike by imposing a labor agreement between rail companies and their workers, as lawmakers rushed to shield the economy from the threat of a holiday season work stoppage and prevent a disruption in shipping across the country. Acting quickly the day after President Biden made a personal appeal at the White House, the House passed a measure that would force the rail companies and employees to abide by a tentative agreement that the Biden administration helped broker earlier this year, which increased pay and set more flexible schedules for workers. The bill passed on a bipartisan vote of 290 to 137. It goes next to the Senate, where leaders in both parties have indicated they would move quickly to avoid a disruption to the nation's rail service. But with liberal Democrats threatening to withhold their votes unless the legislation granted additional paid leave, a key demand of workers, the House also considered and approved a separate measure to add 7 days of compensated sick time to the compact. That measure passed largely on party lines, 221 to 207, as Democrats sent it to the Senate with the support of just 3 Republicans, Representatives John Katko of New York, Don Bacon of Nebraska, and Brian Fitzpatrick of Pennsylvania, end quote. So what does this all mean? What happens next? What will this move by Biden and Congress mean for the rail industry and for workers' struggle to get even the bare minimum of what they deserve? While corporate media is predictably relying on armchair pundits and politicians and industry ghouls to pontificate on these questions, our message here at Breaking Points and at The Real News is the same as always. Let's see what the workers themselves have to say. So to talk about all of this, I'm honored to be joined today by Marilee Taylor. Marilee worked on the railroads for over 30 years and retired earlier this year from her post as an engineer for BNSF Railway. But she is still an active member and activist for Railroad Workers United. Here's my interview with Marilee, which I recorded Wednesday night from the Real News Network studio in Baltimore. Marilee Taylor, thank you so much for joining us today on Breaking Points. I really appreciate it.
Thank you for asking us to participate.
I mean, I know that you've been running around doing interview after interview, and I'm so grateful to you for making time to do this with everything going on. For everyone watching, we're recording this late Wednesday night. And so we're going to try to give y'all up-to-date information. But of course, as you know, news is coming out very rapidly. So, there may be developments in this story by the time that you see this interview. But, Marilee, I just wanted to sort of start, given today's news. Again, we're recording this on Wednesday. So we heard earlier today about Congress, at the urging of President Biden, pushing these two bills through the House, passing them over to the Senate. One that, is very obviously going to pass, which is going to attempt to force a contract down workers' throats and end this 3-long-year dispute. And then a second one that looks like it's dead on arrival, but, we'll see, that is hopefully going to secure more paid sick days for railroad workers. So all of this news has been coming out over the course of the day. And I just wanted to start this interview by, asking, after watching this news unfold, given that you and your fellow railroad workers have been in this contract fight for 3 damn years, can you just tell us a bit about how you're feeling right now, what you're hearing from other folks on the railroads, and I guess what you most want the public to know about how workers are doing right now?
Well, I think it has been an interesting few days. My reaction is equal to that of many of my coworkers, former and current friends, coworkers that on the railroad, other people I meet on the railroad, which is unmitigated rage at the idea that the President of the United States can step in and in a dictatorial and tyrannical manner cut across the absolute guaranteed democratic rights that we enjoy as workers and citizens of this country. Our rights are codified in the Bill of Rights and the Constitution. Those rights give us, those guarantees give us the right to organize on the job, to organize into unions, to organize, freedom of association, to organize ourselves into political and economic and labor organizations, all of which I think our unions have to be in order to get anything accomplished in this day and age. But we're guaranteed that. So any attempt to tell us we can't strike should be met with deep, deep resistance, deep opposition publicly, loudly, and visibly as well. And there are many other ways to do that. For example, I did go on some of the letter writing sites. More Perfect Union, for example, had one. RWU site had one where you just go and you can say, speak to your representatives, which I did several times, and other people have too, which I think is fine, but it's certainly not the answer. This must be a public campaign to win people to our perspective. I think that any worker in this country, and frankly, around the world, is looking at this strike. We have rail workers in Britain that have been on strike, or doing rotating kind of strikes. There's workers in many other railroads I don't even know, even trying to scour the press to keep up with, around the world, that see this fight as their fight, because it's ultimately it belongs as the property of all of us to learn from, to gain experience from, and so on. So there's the rage. And I think it is deep. It is very deep. It was reflected as far back as January of this year, where on BNSF, 100% of the BLET, the engineers union, and 99.5% of the SMART TD, the conductors union, voted to strike over the implementation of an arbitrary, draconian attendance policy that BNSF did. We forced a vote within our international union to strike, period. We are striking. And of course, the railroads, as they always do, went to court and we were enjoined. And we were further enjoined from having public activities away from the railroad. It was a deep attack on freedom of speech, freedom of assembly, freedom of association. And at the end of that time period, we did begin to have activities, different groups. I say we in a very broad context, my brothers and sisters in other organizations, wives to be fully informed about the railroad. I can't remember their exact name. Different organizations like that, rank and file, grassroots types, the maintenance of way workers from the BMWED, they had picket lines in different locations, even around Chicago, trying to explain what the issues were to people going by, people coming in to work and so on. So there's that, I think, and I think it's not just frustration. I think it's directed anger toward the Biden administration, as it should be, for spearheading this attack against us. And I think that every other unionist, every other union member in this country, in the United States itself, is also looking at this, because if they can do it to us, they can sure as do it to you, every single one of you. The nurses need to go on strike to fight for safe patient staffing levels. Oh no, we have COVID. You're enjoined from striking. Back to work. We can't afford to allow you to go on strike. And that's the mindset. Allow us. We only, and we'll see where it actually ends up being, how this all works. I think it's very fluid and it's very volatile, because the primary conditions of the work-life balance, they call it, really what we call it is quality of life issues, being able to have time away from the railroad, away from the draconian attendance policies, to recharge, to rest, to perhaps recover from COVID or any other illnesses coming down the pike on all sides right now, to be able to take care of our children, our significant others, one or more others, that whatever kind of relationships we're in. We're social beings and we bear responsibility too. Things like that we can't do. People are missing the birth of their child. This sounds incredible, but it's true. We miss funerals of our friends, of our relatives. Because of this, we can't not afford monetarily to take off. We don't get paid for taking off unless it's a paid time off, other thing. But we just can't get away. We are at the behest of the railroad under the BNSF policies for every minute of every day, of every week, of every month, with only one 24-hour period of being able to take off without being victimized and punished by the carrier for doing that. It is surf-like conditions. I know a lot of us didn't pay too much attention in high school history, but I'd encourage everybody to go back and read it, because this is what it is. They virtually own you. They want to virtually own you. So if you're not, you must be, under this attendance policy, waiting on them to call, because they refuse to attempt to even produce a lineup that will give you an idea of what trains they're going to run. I mean, they have one, but it means nothing, because some trains never show up. I mean, never. They're ghost trains. We call them ghost trains. They've been on there for 24 hours. Oh, we're going to call. And you organize, if you're the one that's the next to be called, we organize our lives around that. So if you don't call a train for 2 days, and I was waiting to be called, let's say at 7 o'clock tonight, now you're not going to run the train that you kept saying you're going to run. You're not going to run anything else till tomorrow morning. So I will have been up all day waiting on this call. Now you're going to call any minute, because they can call any time, whether it's scheduled or not. And you can't really sleep. So these are day after day after day of this kind of physical, mental, emotional, soul-wrenching grind that has brought us to this point because of the railroad's intransigence in doing that. I've also just wanted to raise that we have gotten a lot of messages of solidarity. A number of unions have put out their own statements, their own press releases. One of the ones that warmed my heart personally was the International Longshoremen and Warehouse Workers Union on the West Coast, who Yes, I some years ago, I had a personal relationship with somebody that worked as a longshoreman and was in the ILWU. And I was just astounded all the time at the strength of the union. The fact that they will not handle goods that are being struck, for example. So if John Deere, during the John Deere strike, if they attempted to load any of those containers filled with their tractors or whatever their equipment, longshoremen have the contractual right to say, I'm not loading that. So that shows the power that exists in possibility, potential, that we need to figure out for ourselves and our own union how to use. But they're very strong in terms of solidarity with other workers, and they have made a very clear statement in solidarity with us.
No, I saw that statement too, and you're right. In characteristic ILWU fashion, right? It didn't mince words. I thought it was beautifully and succinctly put. Everyone should go check that out, and everyone should definitely go support the longshore workers who have their own contract fight, or in the midst of their own contract fight. So we need to show up for them as well, just like we need to show up for the UPS workers later this year, just like we need to keep showing up for, striking coal miners at Warrior Met Coal who have been on strike for over 600 days at this point, striking workers at CNH Industrial who have been on strike for 7 months in Iowa and Wisconsin and are still holding the line as the weather gets colder and the holidays approach. We need to keep showing up for Starbucks workers who are having their rights violated left and right, with Starbucks firing union organizers for the flimsiest excuses, closing unionized stores, all for the purpose of squashing the grassroots unionization effort. We have to keep fighting for one another. We can't let up, because the bosses certainly aren't.
The carriers have been intransigent, stonewalled us every step of the way of negotiations. In the first place, they're very long, drawn out rigmaroles. You have to go through all these different steps. I can't even remember how many they are. More than a dozen, let me put it that way, over periods of time. I can't remember how. This is another cooling off period. I'm so cold, I'm in the deep freeze. I do not need to be cooled off anymore. These are all things codified under the Railway Labor Act, passed in 1924. One of the tangential issues that have come through this struggle is some people want to place their attention on repealing this law, as well we should, as well we should. So this is just a peak of a scene in time, but it's like an iceberg. The big majority is the part that you haven't seen yet. That's been going on, but is not as visible and hasn't been as public as we can be. So I think that you're absolutely right that we have to get our story out. We have to talk to people. We have to name names as to what they're doing, who's doing what, and what it actually is. And I'll start with that naming names. Joe Biden can no longer claim to be pro-union. And as I have explained in other interviews, he is not pro-union. He is anti-union, because when the Democratic Party, with him as the premier, since he's the president, one of the premier leaders at any rate, when they decided to intervene in this strike, they didn't decide to intervene on the side of the workers. They decided to intervene on the side of the carriers. And their labor secretary, Marty Walsh, has been going around the country, including to the BLET National Convention recently, giving speeches about how great the contract is, how much he and the other Democratic Party individuals have done for us, none of which I agree with. And I'm not saying that there aren't members of there are members of both electoral parties that have spoken in favor of rail workers and have voted. There were, I believe it was 7 Republicans voted in the House for the 7 days of paid sick leave. including Marco Rubio, excuse me, I'm tired, stood up and spoke out and said he wouldn't vote to ram this down our throats. So that's not to say that these are leaders, because I really don't think they lead working people particularly at all. But it shows the groundswell. It's almost something you can feel. It's almost, if you pay attention to your feet on the ground, you will feel the tectonic plates of the earth moving under the crust. I think and workers especially have that instinctual nature. They see something like this and it affects them, whether or not they can articulate what that means, or whether or not they may lead them immediately to action or whatever. But there is a tectonic activity happening here that we need to recognize as hopeful or potential leaders of these movements, as workers, as unionists, certainly as someone who thinks about politics, using in a generic term, in a very broad way, national and international, and so on. So I think this is certainly a great time to be alive, and a horrid time to work on the railroad. I mean, that is the reality, but it's a great time to be alive as there is, where there's action, where there's motion, where there is sentiment, there's room for action to better our conditions, to lead the way for other unions, and to join with other unions and other workers who are not yet in unions, to fight together. It's a tremendous chance for solidarity for anybody with a heart.
Yeah, no, I think that's beautifully and powerfully put, right? I mean, there's a great sort of metaphor that the great nonviolent activist George Lakey gives of, he says, like, people talk about polarization in times like these as a terrifying thing, and it can be, and it is, right? Because the extremes are kind of, getting more extreme. The center can't hold. But what he said is that, polarization like you were talking about, this sort of movement energy, this sort of rage, like that's a furnace. Like that is how you put the metal in that furnace, right? And that makes it malleable. That means that the future is still within our hands to shape in times like these. And I think that when people ask me all the time, is like, well, what happens now? Where's the labor movement going? I say, you tell me. That answer depends on how the answer to that question depends on what we all do right now, right? And I wanted to sort of, pick up on that front, because I know I can't keep you for too much longer, but what happens now? So I mean that in two respects. Like, in the immediate sense on the railroads, right? People are still wondering, is a strike still on the table? What is the best, outcome out of, Congress sort of going through the process that it's going through right now? Are people hopeful that more sick days will come of this? So what's going to happen now in the immediate sense? And what is this forced contract and this preemptively broken strike going to mean for the industry itself and for workers like yourself moving forward?
As to what's next, is a strike off the table? Well, I'm an individual who is active in the RWU, as well as with other union activities and so on. And I am not looking for any individual or any small group to decide that they are going, in the absence of a fuller group, that they're going to take any individual action, because that isn't going to work. However, the discussion that's going on is laying the basis for a true action, a true mass action. Whether that means a strike or not is a tactical question. I think we got to be clear that tactical questions are tactical questions. Principle is principle. The fight, if we're clear on what we're going for, we can discuss how we're going to get there. What's the best way? And we have forms for doing that within our unions, within our organizations. there's many places to have that, and you play a big role in that. So I don't think a strike is off the table. The rulers and the railroad barons would hope it is. That's what their game has been from the beginning. For a group of people that does not create profit, they sure are worried about us not bothering to show up. I mean, it has to be one or the other, doesn't it? But we know that we're the ones that create all the value. Warren Buffett creates no value. Katie Farmer, the CEO, creates no value. All those frontline supervisors, I think, pretty much reduce the value because they just suck up the paycheck and have nothing to do with the railroad. I mean, like other jobs, I'm sure. So the question's not settled. And who will, and I think the question has to be, who is the deciding vote? And I'm not talking about Congress. I'm talking about in general. There's only one deciding vote, and that's the vote of the ranks of labor. And I'm not talking about putting an X on a ballot. What I'm talking about is if we don't work, the railroads don't make money. And that is the only thing they understand. And that's why the strike has been a valuable lesson and learned, and also a valuable in our quiver with our arrows. It's an important tool that we have an utter right to, and we have to stand up and defend. So I don't think it is off. Will this 6-7 days sick leave pass? I don't make predictions, but I think that they're looking for cover because the cover's been taken away from the Congress. Everybody that votes, both the House and the Senate, everybody that votes will be recorded. And hundreds of thousands of workers in this country, for the first time, for many of them, want to see what these guys do and want to hold them to it. I also have read a number of different articles that appeared from workers in the railroad talking about how they campaigned for Biden, and openly and publicly and in the media are saying, I made a mistake. That will never happen again. I campaigned for him. I went door to door in the all these months, several, and you actually would know a couple of them. And they and this and that, we get slapped in the face. We're told we're basically told we have no citizen rights. So the ramifications that we're just beginning to see, I think they could be anywhere. But I think the discussion isn't going to end here. What it tells me is that railroad workers are, for the first time, some younger workers are for the first time seeing that we've had 40 years. We haven't had a decent contract since the mid-'70s. Some would say the early 70s. I can't remember the exact date because the more information I get, something has to fall out. That's the way I see it. I just can't remember all of statistics. So none of this is settled. And just a final point on that, the fundamental issue, the reason that we voted to strike in January over this attendance policy, the reason that we all voted in every union to strike over this tentative agreement is over the quality of life issues. If those are not addressed in a fundamental way and if not resolved to give us a better quality of life, this is going to keep, you cannot tamp this, you could tamp it down, but you cannot kill the flame because the objective conditions are still there, are still not dealt with. So even if they do the 6-7 days of paid leave and they force the agreement down our throats, I can pretty much assure you the fight is not over because nothing has been resolved, and nothing has been resolved on the plus side for us in a fundamental way. So those will continue, and they will continue to be a sticking point, and we will continue to work to fight to get our story out, to let the people know. I just have one other little thing I wanted to say, which is that we railroad workers in RWU and not with across the board, we are fighting for the safety of ourselves, our coworkers, and every single one of you that's watching this. Because if I'm fatigued to where I should not be working, which NASA has proven through many studies that being at the level of fatigue that we have on a regular basis is worse than being legally drunk, which is 0.08 in Illinois where I live. So by law, I can't drive impaired by alcohol, which makes sense to me. But I can be so exhausted that my reaction time is worse than being dead drunk. So if you're in a little town in rural Illinois and I go through on a train, you can rest assured that I'm paying as close attention as I can to make sure that your house is not engulfed in an oil can blaze or whatever that I am. And I take that responsibility seriously. And the railroad bosses have really tried to convince us not to take that seriously.
Well, and it's another point that is just so maddening about all of this. And I'm gonna wrap things up in 1 second because I want to let you go. But everyone's like kind of running around with their hands up saying, oh, thank God we averted, quote unquote, a national rail strike. It would have been catastrophic. And what I want to stress for anyone watching and listening to this, as workers on the railroads have been telling me repeatedly, is that you're going to get the effect of a strike whether you want it or not. And what I mean by that is that, as Marilee is saying, if we don't address any of these quality of life issues, any of these workplace safety issues that workers have been screaming about, that the corporate greed of the rail carriers has been like making worse year after year after year, and after this process is played out, the rail carriers, what incentive do they have to change their ways if they're going to just get everything that they want with Congress's help? So things aren't going to get better on their own. Everyone's expecting them to just get worse unless workers fight back. But what I mean when I say you're going to get the effect of a strike is that workers are already quitting in reportedly record numbers. They're going to keep quitting. People keep telling me, they're like, if this is how this all ends, I'm out. I can't make it to retirement. Like, this job is too much. The draconian attendance policies are too much. Being on call 24/7, 365 is too much. I want to see my family. I want to see my kids grow up. So you're going to see more of that talent, more of that skill, more of those accrued years of experience just leave an industry that is already having a hard time hiring and retaining people. So what's that going to mean? It's going to mean more slowdowns, more trains lying idle, more ports backed up, more delays with the essential products that we depend on, higher prices for all of that. So celebrate if you want, but we didn't avert shit. And in fact, we didn't avert anything. Workers had their strike preemptively broken by President Biden and Congress. And with that, I wanted to ask you, Marilee, just by a way of quick rounding out, you've been so amazing, and I can't thank you enough for chatting with us today. So as I always try to end every interview, I just wanted to ask, what can folks out there do to show solidarity with you and your brothers and sisters on the railroads? And, where should the labor movement go from here?
Well, in terms of it, I think there are some basic solidarity measures that everybody can take. Anybody who's in any professional organization, any union, can certainly discuss or invite one of us to speak, or bring it up on your own, the issues that exist, and ask for solidarity. Were we to strike at any point, I would hope that everybody who wants to show solidarity would show up to the nearest rail yard with your own handmade sign supporting rail workers, because if there is a strike, the strike is won or lost on the picket line in battle, whether that means in the political sense or in any other sense. That's where it is. And to win the support of our fellow workers around the country and seeing them in action, it inspires everybody. It inspires me to see I mean, I could go back many years, so I don't want to sound like I'm 90, but I am of retirement age. But so, from strikes like the United Food and Commercial Workers in Iowa, Ottumwa, Iowa, where I traveled from the West Coast just to show up because I wanted them to know that even us, we support this fight. All of those kinds of fights, to the coal miners you referred to, the Alabama coal miners, the Amazon workers, the Starbucks workers. Those are concrete actions that you can take. You can discuss it. I would like to see some churches coming out and saying, Biden, back up, back up. You don't get to decide this. We support the workers. I think there are many organizations that people or not live in, but around the areas in which they live and that they participate in, civil, civic, whatever. And that's a good place to start. And I want to ask your viewership to ask us for solidarity too. If you're fighting especially as a trade unionist in whatever industry or whatever, to organize whatever it is, reach out to Railroad Workers United. And I hope we can put a little blurb up somewhere with the website. Reach out to us for solidarity, because the same way that I'm asking you for solidarity with us, we have the same social responsibility and the same reciprocity, with you that we want to express. So we will be there too. If we're not in every city, but where we are, we can find you. So let's begin to build this network stronger. Reach out, make allies. And it's by working together, in fact, and fighting together, in fact, that we will forge the strongest alliances that Biden and his entire administration and everybody else that is anti-worker, something that can defeat their actions, which for right now is still on the table.
Hell yeah. So that is the great Marilee Taylor. Marilee worked on the railroads for over 30 years and retired earlier this year from her post as an engineer for BNSF Railway. She continues to be a member and activist for Railroad Workers United. Marilee, thank you so much for joining us today on Breaking Points.
Thank you so much, and keep up the good work.
Right back at you. Thank you for watching this segment with Breaking Points. And be sure to subscribe to my news outlet, The Real News, with links in the show description. See you soon for the next edition of The Art of Class War. Take care of yourselves. Take care of each other. Solidarity forever.
Hey guys, ready or not, 2024 is fully upon us now, and Sagar and I have been brainstorming ways that we can really up our game for this critical election.
Yeah, we rely on our premium subs to expand our coverage, to add staff, to upgrade the studio. We just want to give you the best independent coverage of this election, which is possible. So if you can help us out, become a premium subscriber today, breakingpoints.com, or the link is down here in the description video. It really means the world to us, and if you like what we're all about, this is the best possible way to keep us 100% independent, working only for you.